Hi folks, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to take a look at a paper from the very recently concluded International Conference on Software Engineering. And this paper takes a look at the question of how developers learn a new language and what difficulties they face in doing so. This paper won one of the Distinguished Paper Awards at the conference, so congratulations to the authors. The main question this paper looks at is how developers transfer their existing knowledge of a language they're already very experienced with into a new language that they are trying to learn. And the crucial finding is that very often this existing body of knowledge ends up hindering rather than helping their quest to learn the new language. The authors look at some data from Stack Overflow questions and also interview some developers to better understand this. There has been a lot of prior work already that tries to understand how beginners learn programming. The focus of this paper is different because it looks at experienced developers as they try to leverage their existing knowledge to learn a new language. You may be anecdotally familiar with this phenomena where you try to relate your existing body of knowledge in a programming language as you learn a new one, but that doesn't always map very cleanly. For example, if you're familiar with Java and you're trying to learn Kotlin, there are a lot of new concepts you need to learn that don't have counterparts back in Java. Another example is system programmers coming from a C or C++ background trying to learn Rust, and things like Rust's borrow checker are again a completely new concept that is hard to relate back to your existing knowledge. And so the theme that the authors found was that this existing knowledge is actually less helpful than one would expect and can sometimes actually hold back your learning of the new language. And so these are the three main questions that the authors try to answer in this paper. The first one looks at whether cross-language interference occurs. And by interference, they mean existing knowledge hindering your learning of a new language. The second question is looking at how experienced programmers learn new languages. And finally, the third question asks, what do experienced programmers find confusing in new languages? To answer the first question, the authors looked at a bunch of Stack Overflow questions and actually manually categorized and examined them to see if they were asking questions about a new language that were based on assumptions about a prior language that the question asker already understood. In total, they had about 450 posts, and they found that 60% of them had incorrect assumptions about the concepts that they were asking. So as they were looking at this data, they divided these questions into pairs of languages in terms of the language already known and the language that the asker was trying to learn. And for each pair of languages, they tried to determine if the asker is making correct assumptions about the new language based on their knowledge of the old language that they already know. You can see, for example, if you're going from C# to Java, about half of your assumptions about Java are correct. Or if you're going from Java to Kotlin, only about 20% of the assumptions that learners made were correct, and so on. So the upshot of this analysis is that yes, cross-language interference does indeed occur as you learn a new language, and they found that about 60% of the posts contained incorrect assumptions about the new language being learned. Next, the authors look at the question of what is the process by which experienced programmers learn new languages. And this table summarizes all the different themes that they found. They found several different learning strategies. Of course, a lot of programmers simply learn on their own. They don't have any formal training structures. They just read and learn on their own. A lot of programmers utilize what they call just-in-time learning, which is the strategy that they don't try to learn the entire language at once, but as they are building a project in a new language, they try to learn just the features that they need. And of course, we all try to relate new language features to our existing body of knowledge in the language we're already familiar with. And as programmers do this, there is a lot of what the authors call interference, which means that their existing notions hinder learning the new language. One such pattern is old habits learned from the existing language. For example, if array indices start at 1 instead of a 0, that's something that's going to keep tripping you up. Another very common one is whether the type of a variable comes before the name of the variable or after the name of the variable. So those are more syntactic issues, but there's also more conceptual mind shifts that programmers need to make when trying to learn a new language. For example, if you have to program in a very asynchronous manner, that would be a huge conceptual shift if you're coming from a language that has a very synchronous way of programming. And then very often a language might have new constructs or concepts that have no grounding in an old language that you already knew. A good example of that is the borrow checker in Rust or traits in Scala. Programmers also found that documentation and information about languages is hard to find. And finally, a very big challenge is the entire tool ecosystem that surrounds a language. So when you're learning a new language, it's not enough to just learn the syntax and semantics and concepts associated with this new language. You also have to understand all the tooling, things like the compiler, the IDEs, the linker, and so on. And that can also be a significant learning curve. So what does all this mean for programming language design, programming language teaching? The first recommendation that the authors make is that when we write materials to teach new languages, we should try to relate concepts back to existing languages rather than presenting them in isolation. Another recommendation they make is to be intentional in your programming language design, to actually think about these interference effects as you're designing a new programming language. And this might not always be easy. They give the example as TypeScript. Now, TypeScript is a pure superset of JavaScript in that every valid JavaScript program is also a valid TypeScript program. And that was a very intentional design choice when building TypeScript. It does come with a cost, and that cost is that the type system in TypeScript is not statically sound. So those are the kinds of trade-offs that the authors in this paper are asking programming language designers to think about. And the last barrier to learning a new language is learning the entire ecosystem of tools around that language. And the authors are recommending that programming language designers try to build more streamlined tools, more automated tools that make that transition easier. So that was a quick look at a paper that examines how expert programmers try to transfer their knowledge when they're learning a new programming language. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.